All right, we're live once again in the Global Podcast Studios here in Atlanta, Georgia. Rich Casanova here alongside Dewayne Hart, the man of the hour once again. If you haven't heard the name, I don't know where you've been, especially if you're in the cybersecurity space or interested in it, pursuing a career or have questions or concerns. It's definitely a hot topic across, the water cooler conversation, that kind of thing, right? So this is the new era of what's happening in technology, and that is cybersecurity. This man wrote the book on it. He has a podcast about the subject matter, and right now he's here on the show. So Mr. Hart, so let's start off with today's topic, which is about basically cybersecurity in the transportation industry, right? For the most part, we're going to be talking about the personal individual, because these are, most people listen to the audience. If time permitting, time permitting, we may get into questions regarding fleet transportation and government vehicles. But let's lead off with, what's the definition? How would you define this area of cybersecurity and transportation?
Okay, Rich, I'm going to break everybody in on something that's very simple here, right? Let's just look at cybersecurity in itself.
Right.
And look at the use of cybersecurity.
Okay.
Right? So looking at the core elements of cybersecurity and saying, okay, we need to find ways to protect information, data, and make sure we keep hackers away.
Right.
Okay. Let's take that and take it across the road.
No pun intended.
Right? In the parking lot, right, where these cars are parked.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The same concept survives and it's there, but it's automobiles now. Right. So when I think of automobiles, I'm thinking about some of the same core technologies, but they're in automobile because a lot of technologies are reused. When you think about a navigation system in a car, if you think about a remote control device that you have, because you have a lot of remote control devices that you leave at the house as well,
right,
too. If you go and think about a lot of these cars have a mini computer, right? And so take that concept and apply it to a regular computer.
Yeah, so it's not that foreign. The widgets that are in our laptop and our phones, they're just installing it now in a bigger object that has four wheels on it.
Right. And here is the risk factor in this. You're driving your vehicle. Right. And all of a sudden, your vehicle starts to take you somewhere that you did not plan to go.
Ruh-roh.
Okay. And so you end up at the police station, right?
Right.
Okay. So
best case scenario. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So now that is the risk factor, but also take in and looking at the fact that if someone was to infiltrate the system of a car and they put ransomware in there and you can't use your car and they say, hey, you got to give me $5,000.
Right.
Before you can turn your car back on.
It's kind of like getting booted right in a parking lot.
Yes.
This is the digital version of getting booted.
You know what? Now that you bring that up, I'm going to throw something out there, especially about the future, right?
Right.
Imagine if someone did not pay their parking tickets, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see where you're going with this.
Okay. Imagine if there was a way to control that car where you could not drive your car.
Right.
Okay. And that could be a feature in your car where the police department could shut down your vehicle.
Right.
And you
or the meter
drive
maid.
It. Right. Or so imagine that this though, because I don't know if this feature is out there, but I'm going to bring it up.
Okay.
Imagine if a car was stolen, right?
Yeah.
And imagine if for some reason, the system could find your car and to navigate your car to the police station. And it goes and lock the doors. It is a criminal's nightmare.
Well, some of that's already in place, right? Maybe not the exact description, but I know they have, like, in your last, matter of fact, you just finished a live stream episode talking about digital parenting and about kids and technology and parents' oversight of that, right? So I know, in fact, there is devices that parents, in this case, could install on vehicles that doesn't allow the vehicle to go beyond a certain mile per hour, right? For safety reasons. So if that's digitally connected to your car, that's not such a foreign concept that, but then it gets into, who's in control here, or whatever. But which leads into another topic we were going to talk about is insurance and risk management. So the insurance companies, you'd probably get a discount or a credit for your insurance policy if you have this installed on your vehicle. And back to like if it's stolen, it could be tracked, right?
True.
What's the device you push a button and they connect you with a voice person to talk to the?
You talking about your in-car control app, or
there's like a safety device that, like on some of the vehicles, you push a button. OnStar, right?
Okay.
And if you connect it to OnStar, which is a digital version of what we're talking about, they can say where your car is at, and if it's stolen, they can track the car, right? And so they could maybe not drive it to the police station, but they can certainly start to slow down the function of it, and so it comes to a complete stop. And now there's a GPS tracker, so they can locate your vehicle. But this kind of piggybacks into insurance and risk management. So where do you think the insurance companies are at on this topic?
Well, like any type of technology, I don't think they have grasped on it yet because, what has to happen first is there has to be a dire need.
Right.
That's just like critical infrastructure and all the utility plants. They only became a cybersecurity issue when the attacks started to occur, right? Okay. Prior to then, there wasn't a large discussion. Now, if you think about cars, all right, it hasn't been a very large discussion. It hasn't been any type of a large reporting on it. But trust me, once you see this reporting start to happen, that's when insurance companies are going to have to come up with certain policies, because maybe you can get your insurance reduced with certain safety features.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And secondly, too, is maybe the insurance companies, now it's working with the police departments, and if you haven't paid your insurance, then the car is going to sit in your yard. Right.
Well, that begs the next question in terms of leadership. Who's going to be a more proactive lead on this, right? Because like in another podcast, you talked about a topic where not just a hacker's hat, but where people need to kind of like be more proactive about it. But in terms of, is this lie more in the private or the public sector, right? In terms of responsibility and leadership, is it does it behoove the industry to be more proactive about it? I mean, kind of like, actually in a recent episode, you talked about the workforce being remote, right? That was kind of forced upon us.
Yes.
There was no contingency plans to implement that on a global scale until we had a worldwide issue, right? And so, unfortunately, the government and the public sector may be waiting for that dire situation you just described.
When I look at the issue, it is all hands' responsibility.
Yeah.
Because if the issue became something where it was separated, between saying that it's the public or the private sector role, that's when cybersecurity started to fail. Mm-hmm. In my book, I talked about responsible actions and ownership. Somebody has to take ownership, okay, and somebody has to lead.
Right, yeah. And they're going to win.
Right.
Yeah.
But now, since it has not become a really strong topic, I know that the government is taking a lead on this and try to come up with standards that actually needs to be in place, which is good. And likewise, since we're having this discussion, people that are listening to this podcast may not have ever heard of this topic before.
Right.
Never have thought of it before. All right. But hopefully there is a collaboration between the public and the private sector, and also to the automobile industries.
Absolutely. So I got another comment and question coming up, but beforehand, so if you're listening to this podcast, Rich Casanova here in the Atlanta studio alongside Dewayne Hart, and speaking of his book he just mentioned, so go to just DewayneHart.com and you can see everything about the podcast, about his live stream, about his obviously his book, right? So again, just everything you can find, social media, all that good stuff, just DewayneHart.com. So my question or comment is about, we're talking about these dire straits, but the good news is, in a recent article we just pulled up today, the good news is one of the questions is how many hacks have happened to date. The good news is no one can give an exact number here, right? But but there's only been really a handful of real world hacks, such as the Jeep Wranglers in 2016, that's been identified to date. Because a lot of people kind of have this fear, factor involved of like, oh, I don't want cybersecurity in my car. It's going to crash or people are going to take it over, right? That kind of thing. But it's kind of like the autonomous vehicle. When that first rolled out, people were, kind of in panic mode. But the reality is some of these vehicles have gone over like 1 million miles, only had one incident. Whereas the people driving cars have incidents every 10 seconds, right?
Wow.
So cybersecurity in the vehicle is a concern. But I don't think it's something that you have to be overly anxious about, right?
Well. See, what we have to look at is the current state of the technology that is being used in these vehicles.
Right.
All right. If we think about 50 years ago, everyone was writing information down on a sheet of paper and put it in a shoebox and you throw it in the closet, right?
Right.
But today, information is all across smartphones, tablets, emails, and everywhere. How much technology do we even have in these vehicles now?
Right.
Okay. It's probably not to a point where it has raised the alarm.
Right.
But there needs to be a strong discussion. Because if we look at cars now, I think the OnStar systems is one. Mm-hmm. Having a remote control is two.
Right.
Because in those remote controls, you can start your car 15 minutes prior to you entering the car.
Right.
All right. And it's other features that you have. Now, those are minimum type of controls that you have.
Right.
Minimum type of technology that you have. But just imagine as technology start to add on to these vehicles, because now what if you want to have a robotic vehicle? Now, that's when a lot of cybersecurity has come in place, because it's not humans that are driving vehicles now.
Right.
So my point is that yes, the industry should be concerned, and the industry should start to at least accelerate a large discussion about automobiles, and also to try to investigate ways to put some controls in place, because we know that technology grows. Just like a regular cell phone about 20 years ago, we were doing basic things with it. But now look at the cell phones. Imagine all the technology that is going to be included in these vehicles. All right. So it needs to have a discussion.
Right.
All right. Now should people be alarmed? Okay. Yeah. You should be alarmed. All right.
You should be cognizant of it, right?
Yeah.
Just like that hacker's hat reference we talked about. But it's interesting you mentioned about the concerns. But part of the reality is, think about aviation is still to this day one of the safest ways to travel. And the reality is, talk about technology, is that most of your entire flight time is a pilot not steering the plane, right? It's really just on takeoff and landing. After that, it's on, not just autopilot, but all the devices are running that, and it's extremely safe, right? So it comes down to risk versus reward, right?
Yes.
What's our trade-off?
Well,
right?
It all depends on the growth of technology.
Right.
All right. And I'm just going to keep pushing there, because the more technology that you add into the vehicles, the more you're going to have a need for cybersecurity. Okay. Cybersecurity is needed, but the more need for cybersecurity will grow as you add more technology. Okay. And the only way to work ahead of the automobile industry, and I keep repeating this, is to have discussion and to engage. Now, if we look at certain concepts outside of the responsible actions and ownership, and focus toward the hacker's mentality, right, and also too about digital modernization, because digital modernization means that we need to improve the way we do business.
Right.
All right. And our situation awareness have to be there as well, too, because our situation awareness is telling us that this is becoming an issue. So when you think about the cybersecurity mindset, those are some of the interfaces that I see that falls into automobile cybersecurity safety. But likewise, as technology grows,
right,
we're going to have more issues, and hopefully, the government is taking a very strong stand on this now, because you don't want to wait until things start to be drastic and then you step in and say, well, we need to come up with plans, policies, and regulations. It starts with the design of the vehicles.
Yeah, and we were talking about it before we went on the air about design. This balance of, what it's sold at the dealership. We've mentioned kind of the OnStar. That's not really your GM or Ford doesn't build OnStar. That's a third party. We talked about that before, like the third party integration, or these vendors or these suppliers, right? And their security protocol. So in this case, in terms of cybersecurity in your vehicle, the dealership, it may be a benefit, which becomes a selling point, right? You think about back in the day, power windows was a selling point, and power steering, right? But and so same thing with now installing security in your vehicle, or all of these apps and widgets. But you talked about technology as well. At what point, it's going to become outdated, just like they talked about the iPhone 4 no longer gets updates. So at some point, that your vehicle is going to be maintained by a third party, that OEM, right, as opposed to taking it back to the dealership. So, who's, kind of, a bit of a blurred lines, right? Of, as a consumer, where does the responsibility lie?
Well, the responsibility is going to lie in the planning process. Okay. I've always been a component to say that when it comes to the responsibility, is to look at everybody that touches cybersecurity.
Right.
Okay. Now, with that said, there has to be a planning process in place, because as of now, you and I are having a discussion about this.
Right.
So the second question goes, is it somebody in Congress or the Senate or somewhere else in the government, and also the car manufacturers, and also national traffic and safety elements of the government is having a discussion as well too, because those discussions leads into planning.
Right.
One of the other factors too is that I speak about the design factor, because that's the core to resolving these cybersecurity issues here. It needs to be a standard.
Yeah, and catch it on the front end.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, when you have a standard in place, that will force some of the automakers to design these cars, with a government type of standard in place, maybe the NIST, looking at some of the ISO standards out in place, looking at some of the other type of technology and the electrical type of systems that you have to have in place just to meet some cybersecurity standards. Now, what I do imagine too is that there's going to be a framework come out, and that framework is going to say, okay, these are the type of controls that you need to have in place for your automobile. Just
right.
Like there are type of security controls that we have in place for the utility plants.
Right. Yeah.
For the OTS systems. Now we establish a framework for automobiles.
Right.
Okay. And, there needs to be one for voting machines as well.
Right.
Because these are parts of industries that have never been taught or to discuss in depth about before.
Right. Yeah, it's, kind of protecting the consumer, which, a lot of it's that yin and yang of big government taking over and controlling, and too much regulation. But that line of if the consumer wins, the manufacturer or the company developing the product, they win because it gives them that competitive advantage, right? So you think about like government regulations on just the basic of the seatbelt or the airbag. Right, we didn't always require an airbag in the vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. And so at some point, there's going to be those protocols in place that, okay, you have so much technology in your vehicle, we need to protect the consumer. Somebody has to step up and say, we're going to not be reactive, but like we talked about, being proactive. Let's talk about from the hacker standpoint, that weakest link. There's a statement that says an attacker always will go after the weakest solution with the largest impact. Right. So, have there been examples or any guesses of what where a hacker could break into, your devices through your vehicle?
Yes. They hackers, and first of all, I was actually doing some research today.
Okay.
And I find out that ransomware is one of the strongest pushes that hackers are doing, because if they can find a way to actually get your private information from these vehicles,
right,
hackers can use that against you and maybe try to exploit some ransomware somewhere, right? Now, a vehicle in cybersecurity, it actually goes outside the bounds of causing destruction on the vehicle. It can be just as easy as gathering information from these vehicles, especially private information. Let's say, if, for instance, you got the VIN number, and you can get that information, then you can track that back to the owner and so forth, and maybe you can do something to the OnStar system where it forces that car to stop or something like that, right? And then the owner may have to give up some money, through ransomware or something like that, right? So we can really look at a vehicle and say that it can be the mediator between and hacking incident, right? Okay. Because a hacker may not want to hack a vehicle, but what if that vehicle is the mediator, though? All right. Okay. So it's like saying, okay, then this is the core to the piece of cake here, right?
Right.
Okay. So if I get through the vehicle, then I can sit there and I can cause all type of harms,
right?
Because I can get private information and I can disrupt the OnStar system or whatever, and I can find that data, and I can force someone to give me some money, because if they don't give me no money, then I'm going to lock their computer up, right? So if you think about those type of issues,
right,
and how cybersecurity operate, because there is a chain reaction, that could be one of the areas too that could force things. So to sum it up, ransomware, your data privacy,
right,
are probably two of the strongest issues that I think that is happening through like the automobile industry now. All right.
Let me share we're getting ready to close things up here, but let me share this statement I found online. I'm interested in your opinion on this. So I found this kind of top 10 list. So on number 9 on the list here, right, is talking about one of the topics we were talking about was privacy laws. So I'll just kind of read this a little bit and get your thoughts on this. So it says many countries or regions have different laws about collecting what's called PII, personally identifiable information, just what you were talking about. But so the idea is to protect the consumer privacy, but the risk is that that might hamper cybersecurity, right? So you're kind of putting roadblocks, no pun intended, in there, right? But so in essence, could be revealed is what vehicle was hacked, where it could identify the consumers in a location. But, the consumers say, well, that's private information. I mean, like you had another episode about social media, right? Who's controlling that data, right? And so you're releasing it in good faith as a consumer, but then sometimes the government wants to step in. Well, this is national security, right? We need access to the information. So where do you think we're going to end up, landing on this of the balance? And then they talk about some international some countries or other governments don't even allow that information to be shared outside the country. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on, the cost benefit analysis of that?
Well, it's going to go through the same process as with any other type of privacy regulations and privacy discussion. Now that particular discussion is pretty much going to say, okay, here's the government standard here,
right?
And here is a consumer that's saying that I really don't think you need to have my information. Then, then on the other side, well, you have the car manufacturers there, because they have a system where they keep track of who actually bought the vehicle and when. Right now, part of it is to have balance. All right, is to increase protection and to lower risk. I think that when it kind of comes to privacy itself, the most important factor is to make sure that the information is safeguarded and that is protected, and that is only used for the intended purpose.
Right.
This is where the consumers have a problem
Yeah.
here, because you're saying, okay,
Right.
you're gathering this data, but you don't tell me how you use this data.
Right.
Because, see, we have policies and regulations that are written, but at the end of the day, once somebody gets the data, they are supposed to use that data for an intended reason.
Right.
Okay.
And trust that the private sector, the public sector is going to honor that trust, right?
Yeah, because only designated people is supposed to have access to that data. Now we don't know what happens inside of a building over there.
Yeah.
We don't know who is seeing the data.
Right.
Okay. So it's always going to be a struggle.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the idea is to drive data protection and to have laws in place. And I believe that it's going to get better as time progresses, because this is like a junior type of discussion that's going on about automobiles. But I would not want this to rise to a level where it becomes a senior discussion. I call it a senior type of discussion because it rised up the chain, and it has become very important now, right?
Right.
Okay, for cybersecurity. But between the public and the private sector and your automobile industry, there needs to be a discussion happening.
And speaking of discussions, one of the articles you shared with me earlier today, I found fascinating that it had an entire timeline of this topic of cybersecurity and hacking in vehicles and transportation. And it goes back to, it sounds crazy, but one of the first articles was referenced in 2002, how to hack your car on Forbes, right? I mean, that's staggering, because we think, oh, this is the last couple of years, right? So this topic has been in the, on people's minds for going back that long. Another thought I had, and we probably don't have time to kind of dive into this, but we think about that personal vehicle, but ride sharing, those ride sharing vehicles we're getting, those are being monitored 24/7.
Yes.
Right. So we know where those people are going, the point A to point B, everywhere in between. So it's just the world we live in. So I think I'll turn things over to you to kind of close out the show. If you can give us some kind of positive notes, or I think you're going to reference of again, it's really on the individual to be that awareness, right? And close with that, and then how people would get in touch with you.
Well, what I tell you is, when it comes to technology, it needs to be some type of controls in place in the cars and whatever. If you are an individual, here's the only way that I think that you can drive protection. Number one, if you have remote keys that you use for your vehicles, make sure that you don't share them.
Right.
Secondly, is when you go places, and if you have a remote key, make sure you keep that in your pocket or your pocketbook or whatever, because I've seen people that put the keys down on the table there, right? Then they say, oh yeah, I'll be back,
right?
And you can find ways to cipher the codes for those vehicles. Okay. Secondly, is that don't share your vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, only designated people should be driving your vehicles. I know for me, when I go places, I really don't like to do valet parking, because when I see somebody else that drive in my car and listen to my great music, okay, I get
real personal.
Yeah. And I don't like that. So, so I try not to valet park, but I think as a consumer, I think that what you can do is that before you purchase a vehicle, ask the manufacturer, about the type of features that they have on these vehicles. Right. Tesla is growing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're taking the lead in this subject, in this topic, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to really check out the vehicle, but there are minimum type of technologies in these vehicles now, but in the future they will have more technologies in these vehicles, and I would think that it's going to be a larger discussion, but it needs to be a discussion now. So
speaking of discussions, how would people reach out to you for a deeper dive on this topic?
Okay, then for a deeper dive on this topic, you can go to my YouTube channel, and you can always find me on YouTube if you type in the word Chief of Cybersecurity, Dewayne Hart.
Yeah.
You will go find me on YouTube. If you go to www.DewayneHart.com, which is my website for my book called The Cybersecurity Mindset, you can go find me there. Last but not least, LinkedIn. You'll go and find me there as well too. Or if you just one of those person that want to do a Google search, you just go out there to Google and you type my name and it'll come up. And so you'll find me and just kind of reach out to me and just have a cybersecurity discussion.
All right. Well, that's a good note to end on. So we'll see you next time. Again, the book, the podcast, the live stream, DewayneHart.com. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.